Hello, everybody. So this week we're going to do ethics and privacy and stuff like that. And our first lecture is all about ethics. Let's do it. All right, so we're already in week 3, which is pretty cool. And in this particular week, we're going to look at things like ethics and corporate social responsibility and, in fact, privacy. There's a lot of things to cover in a week. There's 3 lectures. This is the first one, and it's really more about ethics than anything else. So here is a list of companies. Not the only list of companies in the world, and certainly not the only companies in the world that deserve to be on this list. But all of them have ethical issues, and all of them have CSR, corporate social responsibility issues. We'll explore some of them in the next wee while, but it wouldn't hurt for you to actually look around and see what is happening out there with these companies and other ones too. Right, let's get to it, because we need to find out what ethics are. So this bit's quite important, right? Because we're getting to a state where the way in which organizations behave and the way in which organizations think that influences the way they behave is really important. So we are going to examine it a little bit closely, and the idea of ethical behavior is something that, you know, we can talk about a lot, but ultimately becomes some kind of a normative problem. So we'll explore that too. So yeah, the ethics is, if you wanted to define it in a fairly simple way, the way of figuring out how to do the right thing. But as I just said, right and wrong are normative, right? Which means that for one person, right may not be for somebody else. So we have to be kind of careful when we're defining what ethical behaviors are, and we have to agree with what standards of society tell us. And you know, there's plenty of rules out there for how society tells us how to do things, because ultimately businesses exist as part of what is a social contract. Let's explore that one. Social contracts are nothing new, but this one is let's just very quickly look at it from the point of view of a company. Society says that a company or an organization can exist, because let's face it, society could quite happily say no, you can't exist, and get rid of it in various different ways by, for example, not shopping there. So society permits an organization to exist with certain caveats, like, for example, registering to be, like, for a company, for instance, in the first place, or buying things off that company, like I just said, or expecting things like taxes to be paid across the lifetime of the organization. So those things are what society expects that the organization will do, and provide society with a certain amount of power over what the organization is able to accomplish, or how it's able to exist, technically speaking. Now, on the other hand, the organization promises to be a good citizen, right? To do good things, to not do illegal stuff, not hurt people, not hurt, say, the planet or whatever, right? That's a social contract, right? Society permits something to exist, and the thing that it permits to exist promises that it will behave in a social fashion. To put it a slightly different way, the context in which an organization exists is the society that permits it to exist, right? Because the society can technically say, no, you can't. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, you can't exist if you don't behave yourself in a particularly in a proper way, right? So whilst it's okay to make a profit, yeah, and we accept that companies are there to make profits, there's an obligation on the part of the company to do the right thing for society, right? So company gives back to society, society lets the company exist and make a profit, everybody benefits. This might seem like I'm beating it around the bush a little bit, but I'm really not. Okay, so society says the organization can exist. In return, the organization acknowledges that what it can do is both good and bad, and it tries to do the good things. Yeah. But we've talked about in the first lecture, we talked about the fact that businesses are there to make a profit, potentially most of the time, and the various stakeholders, like shareholders and stuff like that, need to be they kept happy but rewarded for what it is that they do. How does that work exactly? I'll tell you how it works. I will. It's all about time. Really. It's all about how people see it. What do I mean by time? It's like this. The market that the organization is supported by and is part of and all that kind of stuff, at least the financial market, tends to think in shorter terms, right? So probably to shareholders, but they may think in longer terms if they're thinking about a retirement fund. But the market and shareholders are not the only things that the organization should be worried about, because they're not the only stakeholders in the organization, right? So the problem is, like I said, one of time. There are things and people that are looking for short-term profitability, and there are things and people and so on that are looking for good things to happen to society or the planet or each other or something else. All of which to say, you can focus on short-term profits, probably at the expense of things like reputation or whatever, or the planet or the people who work for you, or you could focus on long-term profits at the expense of the short-term, like Toyota did when they entered the US market. Charge less, build a loyal customer base, right? And like the slide says, this is even before we start thinking about the sustainable development goals, because if we don't think about the sustainable development goals, or if we don't think about sustainability, there won't be customers to look for our product or stuff like that, right? Focusing on short-term profits may result in employees being unhappy, right? And then you get strikes and all that kind of stuff, or people leave and so on and so forth, as well as not selling as much. Why is that, Steve? I'll tell you why it is. It's because the most equitable companies, the ones that look after their employees and their society and stuff like that, are the ones that make the most profit all the time. And they're the ones that good people want to work for all the time. This all comes down to vision. It says, look, see, there's a bulb with vision in it, which is pretty cool, I thought. So let's explore that just a little bit. Back in, call it the dark ages, I was alive, but there you go. About 1970, Milton Friedman came up with the doctrine that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits, and that's all that it should focus on. And actually resulted in, most economists thinking that this was the true and good thing and so on. And only more recently have we started to realize that, in fact, this is absolutely not true. In fact, it's less than not true. It's rubbish. So, what does that mean? We know that companies have stakeholders. These are things like the shareholders of the company, the employees of the company, the customers of the company, the people who live close to where the company makes stuff, which we'll come to later as well. The environment the company exists in and what it can do to the environment. The government that the company answers to, whether it's a, just a part of the company in a different country or whatever. Yeah. And society, right? The society that, permits the company to exist and does all of that kind of stuff, and so on and so forth. All of these are stakeholders. All of them have a stake in what the company does, because nothing is done without affecting something else, right? We live in a system. It's a big system with lots of little systems making it up, but it's a system that if parts of it don't behave in a fashion that helps the system progress, we're in trouble. So yeah, everything is a stakeholder. And I think we're beginning to realize that, and a lot of people have realized it for a while, but we're beginning to realize what that actually means. So we can now start talking about social responsibility and CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's a big deal. All companies should be paying attention to it, and lots of companies do. What can companies do to be responsible members of society? Well, they can help charities. They can fund public spaces. They can help fund like parts of the university, for example, or a building here, or a chair there, or a hospital wing here, and so on and so forth, right? As well as behaving in that ethically responsible way that society says is the ethically responsible thing to do. That's great. And there's lots of things that get in the way of all of that, and it kind of sounds like Steve is being all kinds of utopian and so on and so forth. But when it comes down to it, if you're not socially responsible, you are not going to do as well as organizations that are, because reputation. Right. Being good in society and being seen to be good in society enhances your reputation. And reputation is worth money. Right? It's worth more than profits in the short term, because you'll continue to exist in the long term with people's trust. That's important, right? And if I can quote Warren Buffett, who everybody seems to think is wonderful, lose money for the firm, even a lot of money. I don't actually sound like Warren Buffett, by the way. I think he sounds more American than me, and possibly a little bit older. And I will be understanding. Lose reputation for the firm, even a shred of reputation, and I will be ruthless. What does that actually mean? What it actually means is that reputation is worth more than this set of money right now. Because if you don't have a reputation in the future, you're not going to make up that money, regardless of what you try to do. Because people will not want to do business with you. People will not want to buy stuff from you. Ultimately, that's important. This kind of stuff comes down to corporate culture. Corporate culture is in the abstract, the way that the organization thinks or wants its people to behave, right? Like, come in at 6 and leave at 10. Or like hopefully on the same side of midday or whatever, right? That kind of thing. And whilst lots of different corporations or different corporate cultures exist, and there are lots of different ways of expressing it, like work really hard and have good holidays, or have 4-day weeks and so on, or valuing diversity, and you name it. Those are reflected in the corporate culture, right? And the corporate culture is a really important aspect of an organization, because good culture is good for everybody in the organization, not just for the ones that are like on top making the decisions. So it's entirely okay for organizations to value work over, family, for instance. That's okay, right? That's, like I said earlier, right and wrong are normative things. So the whole ethical kind of stance of the organization is something that you have to choose to like or not like for yourself, right? But so it's entirely okay, right, for organizations to want to make a profit. But there are ethical and probably legal barriers in place to making a profit at all costs. And that's important, right? So, and whilst some things may be legal, they're not necessarily ethical. And you just have to cast your mind back to 2008 or so, which is when you were very wee. But when, whilst it was entirely legal for banks to lend people money who they knew they couldn't repay, do you think it was ethical? That's the question, right? Does society think that that was an ethical thing to do? The answer to that question is a difficult one, because to a certain extent, it depends on, who's in charge at the time and whether or not these things are too big to fail or whatever, right? And so there's lots and lots of things that we have to pay attention to when we start thinking about ethics and corporate culture and ethical behavior and legal behavior and so on. So if a company has a standard of ethics or a code of ethics or a way that it wants to treat society, generally speaking, it's going to want to treat it wants its employees to treat the society in the same way, and it's going to want to treat its employees in the same way, which results in a good culture. Yeah. It's okay for people like CEOs to focus on good corporate culture and to focus on good ethical behavior, but it's important to realize that there are more than one stakeholder. We've been through all those. Some of them focus on different things. So it's important to bring everybody along, especially the ones that have decision-making capabilities for the organization, on the journey. That's okay. That can be done. And one of the, if you like, tools, set of ammunition, whatever you want to call it, that helps is the fact that societies are actually paying a lot more attention to things like CSR than they did before. They're paying a lot more attention to things like greenwashing, for instance. They're paying a lot more attention to pollution, and they're paying a lot more attention to slave labor and sweatshops and so on and so forth. And they make a difference, because if the customers don't want to buy from you because the shoes you make are made by people who get paid a penny an hour, then you're not going to sell many shoes, regardless of how cheap you make them. So corporate social responsibility is actually nothing new. If you think about take yourself back to, like it says, Carnegie. He gave away 90% of his fortune, and he was very rich, to things like world peace, scientific research, education, and so on. Still exists. All of the stuff that he gave his money to, like CMU and so on, still exist in ways that try to help society. So, what Carnegie recognized is that whole social contract, that it's necessary and it's okay to make money, but it's necessary, if you're going to make money, to pay back. That's what the whole CSR thing is all about. What the CSR thing is not about, and what you saw in Victorian society and so on, was rich people thinking that they had a right to know what was good for everybody around them who wasn't rich, because obviously if they were rich, they knew how to do things properly. That's not what CSR is. Right? CSR is being responsible, not being paternalistic. And so things have grown a little bit since Carnegie, and that's great. And CSR is now something that a lot of organizations focus really hard on. At the end of the day, what CSR really is about is acknowledging the fact that whilst there are shareholders and the market and stuff like that, there are other stakeholders. There are other stakeholders in the organization that we've already gone through. And acknowledging that means that you have to pay attention to the actions that you take in different circumstances. So what are the things that can make shareholders happy at the same time as making, having customers want to spend money with you? It could be as simple as making sure that the people that you employ are paid a fair wage and that everybody knows it. Because if you have that kind of reputation, then charging a little bit more for what you sell is reasonable to people. They're paying for you to pay other people properly, and that makes shareholders happy, and it makes the customers happy, and it makes the company happy, and so on. Short-termism, short-term expectations and so on get in the way of organizations doing well in the long term, right? Much more so now than ever before, because people are really paying attention. So you have to pay attention to what one certain set of stakeholders might want in terms of, they want their pension. I'd like my pension, please. That would be lovely. And another set of stakeholders wants the planet. And you need to bring these things together and focus everybody to understand what that really means and to accept different things as you move forwards. That takes a lot of good leadership. Yeah, it's okay to practice CSR, but how you do it is sometimes as important as the fact that you do it. So it makes little sense for some organizations to give money, say, I don't know, smoking companies to give money to lung research for obvious reasons. Yeah. What does it make sense for like oil companies to give money to environmental causes? There are different kind of schools of thought on this kind of stuff, right? But the larger the organization gets, the more likely it is that they can put their money in lots of different places. That's one thing, but focusing on the little differences that you can make in the sphere that you operate in is important, right, for any company. What that means is that corporate social responsibility is much more powerful when it's focused, because when it's focused, all of the stakeholders can see the point of it. And it's really a bad idea to use corporate social responsibility and the donations that you give and all of that to make yourself look better as a marketing tool, right? Because people can see that kind of stuff these days. People understand what that means, and generally speaking, it doesn't go down very well. Focus. And yeah, you've got I guess the best time to make the decision to do something is as soon as it happens. As soon as the opportunity presents itself, do something. Yeah, you might not make as much money as your competitors in the short term, but in the long term, it's almost certain that you will, and more. That's the point of corporate social responsibility. That's the point of helping society understand that you care about it. Yeah. Now, I've said lots of stuff about ethics and corporate social responsibility, and I gave you some names at the start of this little lecture to think about in terms of what they do in societies and what they've done in societies and how it's had an impact on both the society and them. Yes, so let's, in the next lecture, have a look at some of the successes and failures of this kind of behavior.